Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to WMB Church Live on Facebook. We're so glad you've joined us. We are back after a week of sun and spring and trying to enjoy life. I feel like spring is a bit delayed, but we're moving forward. And my name is Paul Chin, Director of Missional Engagement at WMB Church. I'm your host for the next 40 minutes. Last week was Mental Health Awareness Week in Canada. And the hashtag Get Real was the slogan for last week's Mental Health Week. Don't go uncomfortably numb. Get real about how you feel and name it, don't numb it. And so we, along with the Canadian Mental Health Association, believe that every week should be Mental Health Week. And so today we're going to continue with a real conversation about mental health. My guests today are Christie Penner-Worden, pastor of Kids Ministry at WMB Church. Good to see you, Christie. And Lori Pebbles, who's a vice principal at as part of the Waterloo Region School Board. Hey, Lori.
Hi. Good morning.
And we'll get to know them a bit more in a second. But just wanted to encourage you that are watching. We want these chats to be informal. They're live. There's a opportunity for you to ask questions, for us to try and respond to those questions. Anything that you want to ask us, you can ask. We might not be able to get to all the questions. But we just want to have good conversation and have you engage with us and us with you. And so feel free to ask questions in the comments. Let us know that you're here in the comments as well. Make sure that you're liking our post. Hey, Matt. Isn't that nice? Matt's saying hi from upstairs. Make sure you're liking our post. Make sure that you're commenting and also sharing. Last week we had 3 staff share very intimately about and personally about their journey with mental health, and that's gotten a lot of views. And we believe that as we talk more about mental health and destigmatize it, that true health can come through that. And so that's what we want to do this morning, is talk about this. So Lori and Christie, just wanted to get to know you a bit, introduce you to our audience. Lori, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Lori Pebbles. I'm a vice principal at a K-6 school in Kitchener with the Waterloo Region District School Board. I've been in that role for a number of years, about 13. I was teacher previous to that, and I'm married to my husband Les, and my daughter is 10. Her name is Megan.
Great.
And we have
Lori,
2 cats. We have 2 cats. That's important to know.
2 cats. What are their names?
Sleeping over here, and he would be really mad if I didn't mention him. So yes, we hear you. Yeah.
And Lori, you've been a bit of a Facebooker live person this year too, haven't you?
I have. We've I've kind of branched out, as we all have, on our kind of online presence, I guess. And I've been doing some really fun video announcements with my staff and my students this year, and so I kind of know what it's like to host something, Paul. So it's a lot of fun, and it's been great to kind of try some new things.
For sure. Christie, we know you as Kids Ministry Pastor at WMB. Tell us something that we don't know or might not know, maybe about your family, or go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I mean, when we were gathering in the building, you could see me with my family, but you may not know the dynamics of my family. I'm married to Matthew, and we have 3 kids. Ruby is 15, Ben is 13, and now taller than me. That's something that happened throughout the pandemic.
Oh, no, I don't even recognize that guy I see in pictures now. Like,
I know.
he was a little kid a year ago.
He hasn't gained a pound, but he's gained a foot. So, and I think that's true. Like, we're going to see each other's kids one day again and not really recognize them. And then our youngest is Elliot, and she's in grade 5. She's 10. She's actually in a small group with Megan, Lori's daughter. That's something else that came out of the pandemic, was a discipleship group for these girls. And then I also have a puppy named Suki. We have our own little Stars Hollow where we live, if that's a reference that you recognize. And then we also have 6 chickens: Gladys, Lucy, Mildred, Dorothy, Daisy, and Myrtle.
Wow.
So it's a busy little homestead over here.
Wow. There's a whole, 11 or 12 of you there or something like that?
What is that? Yeah. 5, 12. Yeah, 12.
Anyway,
a dozen of you.
That's right. A dozen wardens.
That's amazing. So, as we get into this conversation, I just want to ask, like, hopefully a really easy question. What has been your interest around the mental health of children, families? Especially this year with COVID. What have you seen? What are you seeing? Lori, why don't you start?
Sure. So I was thinking a bit about this ahead of time, obviously, and I've been teaching with the board since the 90s, and I think back to those times, and mental health really wasn't talked about. It wasn't that prevalent in schools. We didn't see it on a daily basis in our students, but now it's really, really prevalent, and not just during COVID, but even previous to that. I think COVID has taken everything and just exaggerated it in terms of kids' emotions and kids' mental health. But really, we're seeing kids just struggling at school, struggling to come to school sometimes. I would say in my experience, again, I'm at a K-6 school, quite a large school, about 700 students. We have a lot, I would say anxiety is the most prevalent piece that we see in our students. So it looks like, and people that aren't in schools might be shocked to see what these little kiddos are dealing with some days. It can be things like kids not being able to even get into the building, whether it's anxiety about coming to school or maybe anxiety about separating from their parent. That's a really big one as well. I've gone out to kids' cars to try to encourage them, cajole them, sometimes trick them to kind of, distract them. Hey, come on, and try to talk them into coming in. I've worked with families where the parent is in the school with the child perhaps and will not physically separate. And with the parent's permission, I've held on to kids while the parent has basically fled and left me with this, in a lot of times, hysterical kiddo who's just really struggling. We also see things like kids that can't have anxiety around doing presentations in class, just have nervousness around that, can't handle that. And when they're in these situations, that logical part of their brain is just done. It's not even able to be accessed. This past year, I think about a few students who can come to school and they get into the building, but then they can't get into the classroom. Oh. And they're actually physically stopped. And I've sat in the hall with some kids a few definite kids for half an hour. Come on, give it a try. Let's go. Then you kind of do some tough love and you try this and you try that. So we're constantly coming up against kids that are really struggling. So I would say that anxiety is that biggest piece. In addition, we have some things like depression can come forth in kids in these age groups. I've experienced eating disorders with some kiddos, suicidal ideation, lots of things like that are really big things that really little kids are dealing with at this point. So those are kind of the things that we're seeing. And sometimes as well, the anxiety is from the parents, and then that's kind of trickling down to kids. So maybe the student's able to come to school, but maybe the parent can't get past some of their own mental health issues to get that child to school. So lots of things around attendance, coming to school, and really just being able to enjoy that school experience the way that they should, and being able to let their brain relax and kind of be able to do their best learning as well. So lots of different things that we see in schools.
Oh, that's tough. That's tough. Christie, what about you? What have you been seeing?
Well, my interest or curiosity about what was happening really became stunted by a lack of ability to get to the kids that I've loved in our church family. To see that, we had, prior to COVID, we had all kinds of rules around adults interacting with children on the internet and how that was a terrible idea. And all of a sudden it became the only way. But what really started to move my heart into action around this subject was watching what was happening inside my own home. Our youngest is a very resilient, joyful, extroverted, social butterfly. And during the pandemic, we moved, and she never did get to go back to her old school to say goodbye to her friends. And she had no way to make new friends in her new neighborhood. And then when she did get to the new school, she was seeing eyes only of anybody and couldn't get close enough to whisper something or to quietly ask. And she couldn't share a piece of paper. She had written a note to a friend that said, "Will you be my friend?" It was as simple as that for her. And she was not allowed to pass a piece of paper. And all of the creative ways that kids have of creating community and interacting and finding their people in a crowded space had been removed. The options didn't exist anymore. And at one point in the fall, it will make me cry every time I say it. But at one point in the fall, my own kid came to me and said, "Mama, I think your social butterfly's wings are broken."
Oh.
And I'm not equipped to be a therapist to my own kids. I'm barely good enough for myself some days. And it moved me into action that a statement like that needs my full attention. It needs me to not say, "You'll be fine," because I actually wasn't sure she would be. And I thought, if this is happening in a household where she has two loving, doting parents who have access to everything she could supposedly need in this season, if this is how it's playing out for one of my own, how is it playing out in our community? And my lack of understanding around how COVID is impacting the psychology of kids compelled me to just start taking some courses and attending some webinars and asking some good questions of people who know more than me. And as a family, to start saying things out loud, that these are not things that we say to ourselves. They can become weaponized against a child. Like, "I'm not a good friend. I'm not likable. I don't have anybody. No one wants to be my friend." That's how the lack of ability to make friends plays out for someone who has so easily made friends in the past. And so it became an issue of practical tools. How do we walk this out without any end in sight of the pandemic, without being able to say, "You know what, you'll get back to school, it'll be fine. Everything will go back to normal." And it was pretty early on that I was able to say, that's not a thing. Getting back to normal isn't a thing. Our kids are being changed by this. And so how do we sit with them in it, not waiting for something else?
Lori, can you talk a bit about what things have been like in your home as well? I mean, I think all three of us have a bit of a social media presence, and we do present like a certain picture of like the happy things and the things that we're celebrating. And lots of people are like that on social media, but there is a reality behind the scenes, right? That it's hard to share, partially because it's not just about me sharing it. Like, I'm sharing intimate things about other people, like my kids or whatever. If you can, like, what are some things that you can talk about in this venue around the reality behind the scenes?
Sure. So I think COVID has impacted every child and impacts every child in different ways. So for some kids, it's missing friends. For some kids, it's being nervous or being scared about getting COVID. And for my daughter, similar to Christie's, pretty social, pretty resilient, but I've seen just more worry coming through for her. Just worrying about small things. When I go to work, even though when I go to work now, there's no one in the building except me and maybe two other people, she's concerned that I've been in the building where there could be COVID. So, I think everything is just amplified and magnified. Not being able to play with friends is hard. And I have an only child in my house who's social. One thing that we've done is we have let her go on, Google Messenger for Kids, but that means she's on a device, right? Which I never would have had my 10-year-old walking around with my old phone doing anything on it except maybe taking a few photos. So as parents, we're changing what we're doing too, to access social opportunities for our kids or to help them to get through things. We have situations in our neighborhood where everyone plays together outside and she doesn't because we've said no. And that's really hard too. And that's kind of eroding friendships in our neighborhood and on our street. And I'm not sure they're going to come back. So there's just lots of things like that. Trying to, parent in a way that's honoring to what you believe in and honoring to what you want to do, but also in this season of time, honoring your child and what they're needing, and kind of finding a way to make those two align in a way that everyone can live with. So,
and then those are hard conversations to have, whether you're talking to a 10-year-old, a 6-year-old, or 21-year-old in our case. So those are, and this has been a shared trauma for so like all of us, a global trauma that we're experiencing. Christie, I know that you've done some reading and learning around that. Can you speak about that?
Yeah. So from an overarching perspective, I would say when a child experiences trauma, it's any loss of innocence. And so even when you think about having a communal mindset for the sake of public health, that's a loss of innocence. We've never had to worry about hand sanitizer and masks. And what it's caused for some kids too is this policing in their head that we can't go there. That person's not wearing a mask, or I need hand sanitizer. And this hypervigilance that can come because the loss of innocence isn't reconciled with developmental milestones. They are actually not old enough or have the life experience to process what they're being asked to do. So behavior is often tethered to developmental milestones, but we're asking them to behave in a way that is irrational to their development. COVID-19 is considered trauma on top of trauma. So even if we look at the story in my house, by Christmas this year, we had to have a conversation about what's COVID and what's the fact that we moved. Because some things would have been hard just because we moved. Some things are harder because of COVID. Some things are hard just because they're COVID. And so trauma on top of trauma, but also we're doing okay. We're going back to school. Now we're shutting down again. Now we're back. Now we're wearing masks. Now you can take it off outside. All of that back and forth is trauma on top of trauma. And each time a child experiences trauma, it prolongs the journey back. So in really loose psychological terms, because I am no expert, it's said that it takes a journey of 2 to 5 years to recover from trauma from the time that it ends. And it's directly related to how long the trauma endures. So this is considered chronic trauma. So living with something that you can't affect change on, and that continues to affect you. And so that the chronic nature of it is where we're seeing some of that behavior and development mismatching. Also, socio-behavioral norms are formed out in community a lot of the time. So when Lori's talking about some of these tantrum behaviors in school-age kids, it seems odd to some of us whose children have gone through developmental norms at neurotypical stages. But actually, when you think about the kids where mom or dad or grandma or grandpa has worked so hard to put them in the toddler room at a church, and they finally got them settled in the toddler room at church. But now by the time that toddler room is open, whether it's 18 months later or 2 years, who knows when we will be able to open that space again, we're right back to where we were, but the behavior doesn't match the age. And so for parents, it becomes really important to recognize where is your child developmentally. And wherever trauma strikes, that's usually where emotional development is stunted. So the beginning of COVID is likely the emotional age your child remains, even though, like for our girls, we're entering into the, dare I say it, puberty years. Their emotional development will be impacted by the trauma that they have endured. So their emotions might look childlike or more childish when they're 13 because they have some catching up to do. And so the empathy and patience and grace that we're going to need to have for children who are acting in a way that doesn't match their chronological age is huge. And we don't know how the trauma has played out in their homes. Like Lori said, a parent's anxiety can have a ripple effect to a child. A child's anxiety can have a ripple effect to the parents as well. And so those things that play out the social developmental norms, the relational ties become insecure because they don't have we're not in each other's presence. We're not sharing community. The adults inside a church that we would normally just trust because they're at church, kids now have filters for trust. Yeah, but they're not wearing their mask right, or they didn't use hand sanitizer. Right. So we're breaking down the fabric of relationship throughout this trauma. And so patience and grace is going to be so important as we reintroduce children to social norms out the other side of this.
Wow. And if I could just add, for some kids, this trauma of COVID is on top of, right? Like, yes. And that's, as when I work in a school, I see so many kids that have had so much trauma already in their little lives. And this is just one more layer. So it is like, it's going to be, it's going to be a big deal to get past this, right? I guess the one interesting thing, good or bad, is that everyone's in it, right? Like you said, it's a worldwide situation, which is not typically how it works. So it's interesting how that will play out.
Mm-hmm.
Christie, you said so much in there, and I'm trying to filter through it or to wade through it because there's just so much that we could talk about. I guess I was reflecting, like for us as parents and for you as parents of younger folks, how is, and you did refer to that, like how does all this trauma that children are facing, how is that impacting, but maybe, I don't know, talk about that on a kind of a family level. Like, yeah. So in some ways people are saying, oh, this has been the best time of our lives as far as a family. Like we've been, like, I know in our household, we've had to work through that transition from like teenagers to young adults over this year. And like, what does it mean to do the dishes without being asked because you are adults? And if you had moved out because, you're university age, then you wouldn't have had your parents nagging you to do the dishes. And trying to be new people, developmentally appropriate people in this really developmentally disruptive time. Can you reflect a bit more on that?
Yeah, I think where my learning took me was to a place of how we build trust within the home when trust outside of the home is fractured right now. From a discipleship standpoint, research says that you need 5 to 7 adults besides your parents who agree about who God is and the role Jesus plays in our salvation and the work of the Holy Spirit. We need 5 to 7 adults outside of the home to agree with our primary adult in order to really galvanize and trust this story of faith. Well, that's hard right now. It's hard to be with anybody else. And we know that screens are a concession in relationship. And so equipping with some practical tools that don't expect parents to be pastors in this season, that doesn't expect them to quick run out and get a theology degree, but actually allows them to walk side by side in step with their kids in this nebulous space of trauma, pandemic, ever-changing protocols. And so one of the things that I found helpful, that is actually a practice from WMB for years, but it became sort of a cornerstone, was the principle of say anything. So prayer is a time that you can say anything to God. Mm-hmm. And if you say it wrong, or you say it mean, or you say it angry, He will forgive you, but get it out, say anything. And so for some kids, even some grownups, they would rather write it down or draw a picture. And so breaking open this notion of what prayer is, that it's just a conversation with God, and you can have it alone with Him or you can have it with others. So say anything to God. And mom and dad, grandparents, say anything to God. Say it, tell Him how you're feeling, and say it out loud so your kids have this model of, you know what, God, I have no idea how to do this. I'm scared, I'm worried, I'm lonely, I'm sad, I'm just not myself. Say it out loud. Give permission to say what's true to a child so that they know that when I don't know who to trust, I can trust God. Start with that.
That's so great, Christy. Like that the hashtag get real, like have real conversations. It's not just about like with each other, but it is, with God. Last week we talked about like the bad theology that has kept mental health issues and challenges in the closet in the church, in the sense of like it's shameful to talk about it, and that somehow God has been judging me, like just bad theology. And so like that simple thing that you're of saying, like, say anything, that is amazing theology. It's so deep, right? And no matter how old you are.
Yeah.
And
the
Lori,
cool thing about say anything is that you actually get to be an instrument of answering prayer. Like sometimes the thing your child is longing to say is something you can actually resolve with them. It's not always a theological curiosity. Sometimes it's, I want to know how to have the Holy Spirit. I've seen that written on a card by a kid at camp who just actually didn't know how to receive Jesus. And I got to look at the staff and say, that's on us. Like we get to help answer that prayer. Let's get busy and answer that prayer. But then there's also a lack of language around how do I talk about how I feel. And so I can even share some files in the community group afterwards of say where it hurts. So anxiety, depression, mental health issues don't always show up as brain issues or emotional issues for kids. Kids who are longing to be loved usually ask for it in the most unloving ways. Actually, let me rephrase that. People who need love often ask for it in the most unloving ways. And so even just a simple gingerbread outline of a body and say, show me where it hurts. Anxiety can show up as a stomach ache, as a headache, as my legs are tired, or I'm not hungry, or boredom shows up as eating everything in the fridge. Tell me about how your body is feeling, and let's see what that's connected to. That was a really useful tool in our home when, I'm thinking I need to make medical appointments and learning that we need to talk and pray and call a therapist. But we don't know this. Like not everybody has this education to know that a stomach ache isn't always a gastrointestinal issue. Sometimes a stomach ache is a heartache, but we need to talk about it to get there. And so just some real conversation about tell me why you feel that way, or what does it feel like, rather than would you stop screaming, which I think my family could probably say to me more often than I could say to them, like, why are you so angry? I've heard that. And I realize I'm just flared up. I'm on fire about something. And, oh, actually, I just need help. Maybe I just need you to help me with this. But having those get real conversations and recognizing that what I'm saying isn't necessarily what I mean, but I have to say it to get what I need.
Lori, thoughts on any of that?
I just not a lot to add. Just I fully agree that we the behaviors we see sometimes are not intentional from kids. They're not wanting to be standing out in the hallway while everyone's looking at them through the door, not able to enter the classroom. They're not wanting to be screaming in my office when mom has left, and they're an age where that would not really be seen as appropriate, right? So kids don't want to do that. But sometimes that's just where they're at. So I think just trying to always step back from that and say, what are they needing? Why is this happening? And just try to help.
Yeah. And as Christy said, it's like people don't always behave in a way that, or ask for love in a way that is very love invoking. And so I think that's part of, it's a good reminder that even in this time, when we're working with our teams or in our workplaces, that like we just need to receive love from the Lord and from Jesus, and that be the thing that secures our identity, not how someone responds to me or someone behaves. And I think that's the thing that I've learned over this year in the home and outside the home is secure my identity in the Lord, in Jesus, in the thing that is true, and to not secure it in the things that are untrue, which is that person's behaving poorly to me or unfairly to me or whatever. Yeah, that's for me, that's how I've gotten through this year.
I would even add, like with regards to anxiety, it's often rooted in a fear of the unknown. And we're in like the 14th month of March 2020, where everything's just a fear, like there's so much unknown. So I love to walk with kids through what we do know. What do we know for sure? And one of the things we can point to for sure is the character and nature of God. Well, we know that he's loving and he's kind and he's generous and he's present and he's real. And we can talk about what we know for sure. And that is where we can turn when we are anxious. And I can't speak to like clinical anxiety or any of that, but those anxious thoughts, those paralytic moments where the anxiety has you locked up and unable to take one right next step. And sometimes it's, okay, what do we know? It's easy to name what we don't know in this season. And it's easy to see, like, to feel the fear of the unknown. But what do we know for sure? And what we know for sure has a lot to do with who God is and who I am in his image. And that is a place of security that we can all return to. Just here's what I do know. I'm going to camp out on what I do know until I can take that one next step.
If I can add to that.
Yeah, cool.
Sorry, if I could just add to that too. And I think, those messages are fantastic. And then also using those when someone can hear them, right? So when someone's in the midst of something, you can't hear it then. So almost this concept that you're going to practice it when everyone's in a good space, and you're going to reiterate those messages when everyone's in a really good space. And then when someone's not in a good space, hopefully, it's easier for them to kind of stop for a second and draw on that, because we all know when kids or adults for that matter are in that stress, you can't rationalize sometimes. So I think making sure we're doing that all the time and just preloading, right? Kind of getting the backpacks filled up. So when it happens, we can draw on it a little easier.
Lori, are there some other practical strategies that you've learned through this year as an educator?
Yeah, when I think about how we help kids in schools and what we do, we're constantly trying to increase our toolbox of things to do when you're dealing with mental health or anxiety in particular. In my experience, it's trial and error sometimes, right? So you try one thing, it works. Oh, it doesn't work now, or it doesn't work with this particular child. So I think doing that, we work a lot with parents and just help them as well. In terms of specific strategies, I've got a couple to share if that's okay. There was a webinar that some psychologists from our board did back in the fall, and it was for parents with anxious kids, really anybody that deals with kids with anxiety, and they had some great suggestions. So the one thing that they really talked about is we try to fix things and make the emotion go away. Don't think that. No, it's okay. Don't be sad. Don't be scared, right? Don't. And that's the wrong thing, or the word but. I know you're upset, but that totally negates that. So one thing that I've tried at home, and I've also tried it at work, is this whole idea of because. So let's say, for example, I've got one written down here so I don't have to think on the spot. Let's say, for example, a child saying they're stupid, they can't do something, they can't do math. You would say, I can understand why you hate math and you're frustrated because it's harder for you. It's a harder subject for you. And because it seems easier for everybody else, and because it maybe takes you longer to do it. So you're doing those three becauses rather than saying, but don't. But you're saying, no, I can see why that would be upsetting because this has happened to you before, or because your friend really hurt your feelings. Or so kind of taking that time. And I think we're resistant to do that because we think we just want to get them out of this. We don't want to let them kind of sit in this and make this be a thing. And we don't want to join the pain. And we want to reassure, it's fine. But I think when kids are in that, it doesn't feel fine and it doesn't feel okay. So I think that's one thing that I learned is acknowledging feelings. And it's okay to say, yep, I can understand that you're feeling that way, and not trying to push it aside.
So that's really empathy, right? It's really allowing them to be and to feel what they feel, and having empathy for that. Yeah. So it opens the door rather than closes the door. Yeah.
And knowing that it's okay, right? You're not going to make it worse by saying these things because they're already thinking these things. So let's acknowledge it and help them feel like somebody's on their side. Another super quick one is just a little breathing strategy. So if you're watching, you've got little kiddos at home, or even for adults, for goodness sakes, just coming up your finger, breathing in and out. So if you're
I can feel it already.
Right? And you always have your hand with you. You have two if you need to do it a second time. So you have the tools with you. The final one I just want to mention, which I think is really powerful, is if a child or an adult, again, it can go for anybody, is feeling anxious or feeling overwhelmed, to focus on your 5 senses. So you would say things like, notice 5 things that you see. What are 5 things that you see? What are 4 things you can touch? What are 3 things you can hear? Maybe 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. So again, just kind of stopping that, getting your brain focused on something else, and looking around you and kind of getting yourself recentered and kind of back aware of where you're at. Because I think sometimes when people are in the middle of a lot of panic and anxiety, it's all about being in here. So what do you see? What do you hear? What do you see? Touch, that kind of thing. So those are a couple super, super quick things. But I think the one thing I just want to say quickly is I think in our schools, we are doing such a better job of labeling this and talking about it and normalizing it. And we're talking about mental health with kids, which is a daunting topic, but we're acknowledging it and we're saying it's okay not to be okay. And that's a phrase we use in our school. It's okay not to feel okay right now. And that's where you're at, and that's all right. So I think there's tons of miles to go, but we've certainly made some great strides the last few years in accepting it. And like we talked last week, talking about it.
With that breath exercise, I would, it reminds me of one of the things we love to do with kids is breath prayer, where you find, so when we're in parallel with that, all the unknowns right now, what do you know for sure? Taking one thing you know for sure that is a source of peace or comfort for you, like I am a child of God, and it's on your exhale. I'm a child of God. I'm a child of God. And so that breath prayer, and of course, like you said, Lori, these are the things we learn in confidence when everything's okay, so that we can draw on it when they're not, when we're not okay. What do you know for sure? What's true in this moment? Breathe it in, say it out. Breathe it in, say it out. And so for those of you discipling your kids along this journey, adding the truth about who God is and who your kid is because of Jesus, adding that to their breathing, at some point it cannot escape them. It is written on their hearts, and it is the place they will know to return when they don't know much, when there's so much unknown around them.
Love that. Love it.
That's so beautiful, Chris. I actually do that myself, right? Like on Monday, I went for a long, long walk through the forest, and I was breathing in, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the Father, thank you for loving me. And as I walked, I just repeated that. And it's not a mantra in the same way of like we're trying to empty our mind, but it's a focusing, a breath prayer that reminds us of truth. And if you repeat it enough, it gets to the place where you're not even thinking about it. You're just receiving it. So that's so beautiful for anyone, people of all ages could do this. Mindfulness in the hand. My watch has an app that helps me breathe. It's kind of silly, but I think until COVID hit, everyone's like, what's the use of that? And it's like, oh, actually that's really helpful. But now I have 2 hands, so that's good. I like that one too. So
my mom had many surgeries when I was a child. She had her whole spine reconstructed. And so I spent lots of time visiting her in the hospital. And that was a time in history when people actually stayed in the hospital for long times after surgery. So she was away from us a lot. And there was one time I went to visit her, and she was just saying the name of Jesus over and over and over. And I was 7 years old. I had crawled up in the bed with her, and I asked her, why are you saying his name over and over? And she said, because it cancels out everything else. The name of Jesus is enough. So even if you haven't landed on one of those expressions or a beautiful prayer like yours, Paul, the name of Jesus is enough to cause all else to know its place in the kingdom, that every knee will bow and every tongue confess. And just the name of Jesus will rightly size and rightly order your next thoughts over time.
That was, so this whole idea of filling our minds, it was a monk, I'm not sure what century, but it was Brother Lawrence that talked about practicing the presence of God. So that's really what, and I read that as a university student, but that's what really that is. It is just repeating a word so that our mind can move towards practicing that presence of Jesus, the Holy Spirit, Father, in our lives. So good. Wayne's got a comment here. It's hard to support our kids when we as parents aren't that aware of our own feelings and we are having a hard time with everything. So true, Wayne. So true.
Yeah, and we know that discipleship too is a modeling, right? It's walking close enough to get dirty in the dust of the one you follow. And so the best way to actually teach our kids some of these practices is to do it with them. And so it's not always about supporting your kids. It's about going with them. And I do, you do. Let's do this together. You know what? I need this too. I don't know how I'm feeling. You seem like you're feeling this. Is that how you're feeling? No, I don't know how I'm feeling either. Let's draw it out. Let's draw a picture. Let's say words. Let's say anything to God. See if we can come up with something. So it's not, and I think that's some of the language that can trip us up, is that we should know better, or we should be able to lead them somewhere. Actually, we just get to go with them. Like, we get to hold their hand and walk beside them. And sometimes our children will be the spiritual heads in our household because they're not the one that's hurting in that moment. And the things you teach them in health, like Lori said, they can recall for you when it's your turn to need a minute. Yeah. And allowing our children to lead us, and then taking turns as we hold hands and walk together, that is the way of Jesus. He plunked a child in the midst, in the middle. Let your child be in the middle of it with you. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to have the answers. You don't need to be further ahead. How could you be? How could you be further ahead in this season? Go with them. Give them permission, but give yourself the same permission, and sit together in it.
So good. Wow, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you coming and sharing from your hearts, both of you, both as the professional educator and the professional pastor, but also as just moms and parents on this journey, and co-disciples that were just walking together, trying to figure this out. So I'm so thankful for you to do that for us this morning. And so next week, we're going to continue on with this conversation, with the Get Real conversation. Next week, we have Dr. Rebecca Shemaine, who's part of our church, and she's got 2 teenagers. I think it's just 2. And she's a professional psychologist. And so she's going to come and share some other strategies with us and talk about this topic some more. And so we're looking forward to having her on. And 2 weeks from now, we have Benita Eby, who was a pastor at WMB and has a story of her own journey with burnout, and because of that, has become an expert on burnout and some strategies. And she's also going to talk about this thing that has been named as languishing, that sense like it's not depression and it's not, but it's kind of just like, blah, meh. And so I'm looking forward to talking with Benita in 2 weeks. So, but for today, we're just going to say goodbye. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to share this interview with others, and the good news. I know, Lori and Christie, that you'll put some of those strategies in our comments so that people can access them after. But thank you for being a part of this. So everyone, we're going to say goodbye for now.
Thanks, Paul. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks for having us.